We're here to talk about the Government of National Unity 1 year on. The official birthday, I think, was last weekend, but it's about a year ago after the elections that we sat through a few weeks of everyone being on tenterhooks as to know what would happen, who would be in this Government of National Unity, and how long would it last. Many people thought that it wouldn't last very long. Today's events, with the dismissal of one of the DA deputy ministers, suggests that another bump in the road is about to hit us. The DA's federal executive is meeting at the moment, I think. We'll see what they come up with, but no doubt it'll once again raise tensions and squabbles within the GNU. But it is still there. It is still going after a year. I think most people believe that that's probably good for the country and good for our democracy, although, of course, there are differing points of view on that. And we're going to explore this a little bit this evening with our two guests. Very pleased to welcome back to one of our webinars, Professor Jaap de Visser, our public law professor at the University of Western Cape and member of the Dullah Omar Institute there. And let me mention that we are co-hosting this event with the Dullah Omar Institute. And a new guest for Cplo, Professor Sheila Mainkes, who was at one time the head of political studies department at the University of the Witwatersrand, and also a commissioner, one of the first commissioners of the Gender Equality Commission, one of the Chapter 9 institutions. Sheila, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to a Cplo webinar. Thank you for making time for us.
Pleasure, thank you. Nice to be here.
Right, so we're going to do this in the form of a sort of small panel discussion. I've got a set of questions. I've shared the questions with our two speakers, and we'll run through those and hopefully leave some time over for your comments and questions as well. As always, it's easiest if you enter those into the chat box or the Q&A. I will take verbal questions if possible, but sometimes the connection is not good. So if you type them into the Q&A or the chat box, then everyone can see them and the speakers can read them and answer them, even incorporate the answers into what they are talking about. Let me also mention before I start that this event, as most of our democracy and governance projects events are, is sponsored by the Hans Seidel Foundation. We're always grateful to them for their input and for their ongoing support of Cplo's work. They're also one of the sponsoring organizations of the Dullah Omar Institute. So it's all in the family, one way or the other. The last thing I'd like to do before I start off with the question is just invite you all to take a moment. Those of you from a faith background will want to invoke the Holy Spirit on what we're doing. Other people maybe just want to recollect why you have taken the trouble to spend part of your evening talking about the GNU tonight. So just join me for a few seconds of silence. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I've probably forgotten a couple of very important announcements which will strike me halfway through the webinar, and then I'll mention them. But I don't think that there needs to be too much more housekeeping. Let me begin, Sheila, with asking you the question. As I said, when the GNU was formed, a lot of people, informed people, observers and commentators and so on, doubted whether it would last a full year. Are you surprised that it has lasted? And does its survival of its first year suggest that it might hold together for the full 5 years until our next election?
Well, I think a year ago, many South Africans were surprised at the outcome of the elections. Who would have thought that MK would do so well, 14.6% of the vote, and the ANC's share was only 40%, and the DA's at 20%. It came as a shock to the two top scorers, I think. And what were they to do? Now, talk of coalitions had surfaced some time before the election, and even talk about grand coalitions. And it was also well known that coalitions are difficult to manage. They require understanding of what parties bring to the table and what the differences are and what the convergences are. So after the election, the impossible had arrived, and it certainly seemed the impossible, and suddenly it became the possible. Both the DA and ANC recognized the options, and both rejected populism, and both agreed with the fundamentals of the Constitution: human rights, rule of law, equality, the need to restart the economy, albeit in different ways. So I think there was the agreement would never have been easy. It wasn't an easy fit. Ideologically, the parties were far apart. But I think that the DA was really keen to start governing at the national level, and it would give it a chance to show its capabilities. It was a risk for both parties, but I think perhaps more for the DA, as it's to lose its distinctiveness and possibly become nothing but a junior partner in governing. And this is perhaps what the ANC hoped for. But if so, both may have been surprised and maybe both underestimated, as I think many of us did, the way that the GNU actually reinvigorated Parliament. The legislature and society in general needed a new path to regain confidence in government. So I think those were all those all augured well for what happened in the year. And certainly I think Parliament has got a new lease of life that has perhaps surprised us all. We now see how the portfolio committees have suddenly become new centres of accountable governance in the role that they are playing, and that's amazing. They're examples of the role and proper function of cooperative governance, which is what Parliament should be. They're taking their oversight role much more seriously than before. So really, it is the GNU that has made this a reality, and the GNU partners are working together. The DA has managed to keep its identity and to enhance its reputation. Its capabilities in governmentality, the art of governing, have proven themselves in a short year, I would say. And I think they're doing well. Schreiber has shone in Home Affairs. Gwarube in basic education in a year has already come out with regulations. Steenhuisen has shown that he's a competent minister in agriculture. So, and then on top of that, of course, the DA has used its well-oiled media machine to extol its own virtues, and that's irked the ANC, but it has generated a healthy competition between parties and between ministries in the GNU. Instead of rubber stamping the activities of the administration, I think that the committees have insisted on accountability and even brought quite forthright reports to Parliament about what has to be done. And I mean, all of this is new. It sort of gives a new sense of suddenly, something happening at the level of Parliament and the legislature, which is really good news, and I think augurs well for something that can continue. So, in that sense, I think the GNU has found a sort of modus vivendi that could continue to function until the end of this administration. But it's the crises and the quarrels and the lack of consultation that have brought on a kind of brinkmanship and that give us some uncertainty. So, I think there is still uncertainty here. First of all, the DA going to court, over Bella and employment equity. And I think that's eroded trust. And then the budget, when the ANC acted as if it didn't need to consult with other parties. And now, of course, Ramaphosa sacking the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry. I think that has brought on a kind of new crisis.
Yeah.
So in many ways, this year has brought us to a point where we can say, well, it's kind of working, but it needs to settle down and learn about what is fundamental to all coalitions: compromise. It's about compromise, compromise, compromise. And that's what they, I think, have still got to learn.
Thank you. Jaap, if I can move on to you. One of the reasons why there was concern from the beginning about the stability of the GNU was the lack of clear coalition guidelines, lack of enforceable agreements. You wrote about this yourself on a number of occasions, even before it was formed. Is this still a problem, or do you think that the statement of intent and the what they call the clearinghouse mechanism is adequate to deal with disagreements and frictions and so on?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and good evening, and good evening to my fellow panelists and all the people on the call. It's great to be with you. So, the concept of stability, I'd like to sort of unpack that a little bit. What do we mean with the sort of we're also quite scared of the concept of instability. Now, you can have governance instability, policy instability, or administrative instability, or all three. And we talk about governance instability. That means government falling, ministers fired. There's no government now. We haven't had policy. We haven't had governance instability really in that year. Look, there's now the sacking of one deputy minister, and we have to find out more about what's the reason and what's the consultation and what's the impact of that on the coalition. But we have not had governance instability. And I think I agree with Professor Meintjes that that's not a mean feat for our context. I mean, just to give you a quick comparison with what's happening in Europe, the Dutch are going to vote again for the third time in four years. In Belgium, they've had 4 governments in 6 years. In the UK, they've had 4 governments, or in England, they had four governments also in 6 years. In Austria, 5 governments in 6 years. And in France, 6 governments in 6 years. So when we talk about governance instability, we're actually doing pretty well compared to many of the countries that, for one reason or another, we like to compare ourselves with when it comes to these kind of things of coalition instability. So the governance has been stable thus far, and of course it remains to be seen how stable it will remain. Now, administrative instability is when there is purges, when DGs are being sacked, when bureaucracies are being turned over, and when the administration comes to a halt. Now, of course, we see that on a large scale in local government, administrative instability as a result of coalitions, but not in the context of the GNU. We have not had any stories of a mass purge of DGs or senior manager. None of that has happened. So we also have not had administrative instability on any large scale. But policy uncertainty and policy instability, yes, I think, of course, and Sheila mentioned it and referred to it. Yes, we've had that. We've had lots of policy uncertainty around major policy and legislative debates where things seem to be uncertain and we're not quite sure in which direction it is going. Now, to your question, whether we would have needed stronger law or guidelines or rules for coalitions, I think that there's a distinction between, on the one hand, the rules, not so much the rules for coalitions per se, how to do coalitions or how to manage them, but the rules around coalitions, the rules of the game, the constitutional rules around parliament and the executive. Now, of course, and elections. Now, of course, you can talk about wholesale changes to that, changing the electoral system, changing the way we elect a president, and all of that would completely undo possibly the need for coalitions. But that's not on the cards. I don't think anyone is really arguing for a massive change to the way our parliament and executive works. But one could think about tweaks to the system to make coalitions more manageable. For example, the idea that, or the rule in the Constitution, that you must form a government essentially, or you must elect your Speaker of Parliament within 14 days. That's very quick. And we saw that pressure, and it's immense. Of course, it made us move fast, or it made the coalition parties move fast and do something that many other countries take months to do. But you could argue maybe we need to give a little bit more time for that. The other tweak that you could consider is it wise to have a secret ballot? I mean, we all saw the images of the secret election, or not secret election, but the secret ballot for the election of the speaker, the deputy speaker, and the president. In a coalition scenario, it probably makes more sense to do that with open show of hands, so that every party knows and the public knows this is how the various MPs have voted, and party discipline can be enforced much easier when there's an open ballot. You could also think of, do we need to limit motions of no confidence? Do we need to make it harder for motions of no confidence to be tabled? Higher threshold for the passing of motions of no confidence? It's a big debate in local government. But again, in Parliament, we haven't seen a flurry of motions of no confidence, and we haven't seen any of the mayhem that we see, for example, in the city of Johannesburg with a motion of no confidence every other month. So there may not be need to really consider that. And of course, there's the big elephant in the room is, are we so concerned about the fragmentation of politics that we want to introduce a threshold, that we want to make it harder for smaller parties to gain entry into the legislature? Now, that's a huge debate, which is raging in local government, but hasn't really come up in the national government sphere as yet. But those are the kind of tweaks that you can think of that could make coalition formation and management slightly easier. But I would be very reluctant to really motivate for any of them, because they would require constitutional amendments. And as Professor Menkes was saying, we're doing fairly well when it comes to management of the coalition, at least certainly in the governance space. You could, on the second leg of sort of the rules for coalitions, you could talk about the rules for coalitions themselves, how to manage and form coalitions. For example, do we need some sort of guideline for what actually happens after the election? Is there, and you have an electoral outcome, and it's a scrambled egg, and now we're all sort of staring at each other. Yeah, who's first? Who does what? What's the procedure? Is there some sort of protocol that can be followed? Is there some sort of mediator that will take the reins, or is it all dependent on the largest party to take the initiative? One could consider forming some sort of protocol for that. The second issue is, what do we make of coalition agreements? Should that be formalized more? Do we have sort of a legal insistence that we need on making them public? Do we need some sort of standards for the content of coalition agreements? Should we make them enforceable? I'm very hesitant on all those issues. I don't think we need to really think of law on that. For example, I don't believe in the concept of enforceable coalition agreements. I think it would be unconstitutional, because essentially what it boils down to is instructing a member of parliament to vote in a particular way because of a contract. And that's unconstitutional, in my view. We don't want that. We don't want our MPs to vote yes or no for a certain nomination because there's a contract somewhere that binds them to vote in a particular way. That would be unconstitutional. So on all those issues of the rules for coalitions, I think it's much more important that we closely monitor and work on the formation of conventions and traditions and ways of doing politics, rather than rules and statutes to seek to govern this. And we see that already emerging. The statement of intent was made public. We know that there's a clearinghouse mechanism. Certain practices and traditions are slowly forming and emerging in their infancy, and probably not very effective as yet. I don't think the clearinghouse mechanism is working as well as it should. But I think, it's early days, and we are newcomers to this issue of coalitions, and we are slowly but surely developing homegrown political traditions and conventions that I think are moving us in the right direction. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. I'm pleased that you both are coming across quite positive about what's been achieved so far. That's good to know. politicians tell us from time to time that there's more that unites us than divides us, and we're all working for the same things and so on. And in fact, when Mr. Ramaphosa, Mr. Steenhuisen, and others were sitting in the White House a few weeks ago, it really looked like they were very much on the same side. Now, Sheila, is this really the case? Is there more that unites the partners, not just the DA and the ANC, remembering there are another 8 parties in the GNU? Or can we say that they've managed to put aside their ideological differences, or are they just really sort of papering over them at the moment?
Well, I'm not sure that they want to put aside their ideological differences, but I think that in practice they recognize that there are these huge differences between them, and they are trying to find ways to mediate them so that they can get on with the work of governing, of the legislature, of debating together. And I really think that what has happened is that people who were sort of at one another's throats are now having to really find a way of getting on. Now, Parliament has always, in a sense, been like that. There's always been this kind of tension between, being on the floor and arguing against one another, and then actually working together in the committee structures. And I think that committee structure allows for a sort of cooperation that in the committee situation. And as I said earlier, I think that this is working better than it's ever worked before, precisely because they really have to get on. And in fact, in an interview with the ANC chief whip recently, he was quite clear that he and the DA whip get together and they work out how they can mediate what is going to be a difficult situation. And they find ways of doing that, which is very, very interesting. You can see how Parliament is working in that sense. So I think there's a new kind of air of cooperation and an interesting freedom, actually, that seems to come to Ramaphosa himself, both from what's happening inside the GNU. It is working, I think. And then from the Trump visit, lots of people call both a failure. But I think there's another way of looking at it. Just as the GNU has returned us to a sense of responsible and accountable government and governance, where we're taking seriously the division of powers and the authority that exists between executive and legislature. I mean, there has been such robust questioning of ministers in these portfolio committees, which I've been watching in the last little while. It's almost unbelievable how ministers are being questioned by younger MPs, for example, in very robust ways. So I think that cooperative governance is working in the way that Westminster democracy requires it to, and that is, after all, what we are. I think the Trump visit showed both the tactical capability of Ramaphosa. I mean, who else would have brought golfers to this party, if you ask me? And also what he showed there to the world, really, if they were watching, was the face of the diversity that South Africa has, and the diversity in his government, and how it works. He is something of a master of compromise, Ramaphosa, which probably makes him able to navigate around all these tensions that are happening. And even if he creates a few, he's probably doing it very well aware of what impact it's going to make. But, he has prerogative because he is the president. And that doesn't alter the fact that there are these huge, big ideological differences in the GNU. And in fact, that's what grand coalitions often are. The CDU and the the Social Democrats in Germany were miles apart, and yet Angela Merkel held them together in a most remarkable fashion. And the compromises were really good for the country. People were really afraid about what that would bring, but in fact, it brought things together in new ways. So, in fact, all sides in the coalition have to learn to govern around their differences. Otherwise, things just fall apart. And at least the whip seems to have internalized this and meet weekly to find ways around their difference so that governing can happen. So I think there is, as Jaap mentioned, I think they are finding a way, and there's a certain maturity that's entering into our politics that we haven't seen before, at least, in Parliament. I think it's extremely interesting, actually, what's going on.
I'm glad you mentioned Parliament in particular, because I think most of us, when we think of the Government of National Unity, we do think of the executive, with the presidency, the cabinet, and so on. But it has made such a huge difference to the way that Parliament is operating. It's almost like I want to have a separate webinar to examine that, the way the portfolio committees are working, the fact that we have an ANC speaker, a DA deputy speaker, lots of committees now being chaired by members of the smaller parties. It's made a really big and important difference. But we'll keep that conversation maybe for another time.
Yes,
Jaap, Sheila mentioned earlier this strange phenomenon of the DA in particular. And again, I don't want to keep singling out one party, but the DA has gone off to court on a number of occasions now. The Bella Bill, the Expropriation Act, the NHI, it might even be employment equity is another one, to challenge the government on these issues in court while it is part of the government. Can you explain that? It seems to be a very strange way of going about things in a coalition.
Yeah, no, I agree. So 2 points I want to make about it. The first one is a slightly, sort of conceptual point, but I think it's important to take note of it, is that, the South African brand of constitutionalism is a bit different from what we see, in many other countries, particularly in Northern Europe, where our courts are not too shy to deal with politically sensitive issues. So we have a system of constitutional practice whereby, our courts are often called upon to adjudicate politically sensitive issues. So that's part of the background. But that said, I still think it is, as you say, it's counterintuitive for the DA in particular, as a coalition partner to go to court on so many issues. And for me, the biggest takeaway from that is that it means, therefore, that the clearinghouse mechanism, which is the main ultimate dispute resolution mechanism within the coalition, is either not working or it's not being exhausted. Because that's exactly why you have dispute resolution mechanisms in a coalition setting, to deal with conflicts, to channel conflicts, whatever they may be, and to seek to resolve them through negotiations. And of course, the ultimate resort after that would be to go to court. So I think more work needs to be done on refining the clearinghouse mechanism and refining the practice of using it, so that coalition parties don't have to resort to court action to have their dispute resolved. Because it does, one wonders, how far can the DA go? How often can you poke the bear until the bear strikes? And how would that manifest? It would manifest, and maybe this is what's happening now. We don't know the reasons why the Deputy Minister for Trade and Industry was relieved from his duties. Because the bear would strike if the bear would say, I'm going to relieve all the DA ministers of their duties, and this is going to be a cabinet henceforth without the DA. That's obviously the risk that the DA takes. On the other end of the spectrum, as soon as that happens, the DA would retreat to the opposition benches, with the result that President Ramaphosa would become vulnerable for a motion of no confidence, because the DA only needs to team up with one or two of the other opposition parties, and President Ramaphosa can be voted out of office. So that is the game that is being played here. How far can the DA go? How much will the ANC take it on the chin every time these court cases? And at what point will has their patience run out? Of course, the strong point that the DA would have is the DA knows that the ANC's alternatives are limited. The alternative for the ANC is to go the populist routes, to partner with the EFF or with the MKP, the MK party, and that is something that I think is still sort of a specter for many in the ANC to consider that. So both the ANC and the DA are in a bit of a bind. But I agree, it is counterintuitive for a coalition partner to resort to court action on so many issues, and it shows to me that the clearinghouse mechanism is not being used or not being exhausted.
Can I ask an issue here? Do you think that that's intentional? I mean, do you think this brinkmanship is the game? Yeah.
I don't know. It's a difficult, and I can't. I'm not a political scientist myself. I can't. I don't have a sort of a considered view on it. I just think it is peculiar that the DA takes this route, knowing that they have avenues within the coalition to raise issues. Look, and there's also differences between the various court cases. I mean, there are some of them that are really principled on procedure and on constitutionality. But even there, you could argue, you can raise those issues in the clearinghouse mechanism, say, we insist that this law, for example, on the budget process, will be amended for future purposes. So I also wonder what the end game is for the Democratic Alliance, and I think maybe part of it would be, and this is not where I'm trying to be a political scientist in my own amateur way, is the DA, of course, needs to show its constituency that it is still the DA and that it hasn't been absorbed into a amorphous coalition. It is still standing for the principles that it stands for, etc. And this is where I think we can learn from practices elsewhere, where you in a coalition setting, what you can do is you can elevate the notion of agreeing to disagree in a kind of a more formal and accepted setting, where you can say, okay, we come out very clearly as a DA that we disagree on, for example, the Bela Act. We just don't agree with it. We disagree with it. We formally register our discontent and our disagreement. We say that to everyone. Our constituency knows about it. We stand for what we stand for. But guess what? It doesn't mean we collapse the government. And that we accept that kind of pragmatism, that you can disagree on something, but still decide to continue to govern together. And I think that's what other countries that have been practiced coalitions for a long time have more experience in. For example, in some of the Scandinavian countries, coalition partners can officially register their discontent with a cabinet resolution as sort of a note to the cabinet resolution. Say, well, this resolution was taken, we are part of it, we take collective responsibility, but we don't agree with it. Because in that way, you can keep your constituency happy, yet remain in government. So that's the kind of, I think, pragmatic coalition politics that I personally would like to see more of, instead of involving the courts.
Yeah, I think you are right, though, that what's happening here is that the DA wants to keep its constituency happy, and also to maintain its separation from from the ANC's point of view in a way. And I think it's very interesting that Guadalupe has come up with these regulations, because she's also putting a kind of DA stamp on those, which is very interesting, I think. I think the compromises are also entering into the act that they so opposed. She's doing the regulations. She's done them, and she's put in there what she wants, in a sense, which is interesting, I think. So I think the DA is putting a big stamp on this, although it only has 6 ministries under its control. It's very interesting.
Okay. Yeah, it's probably still part of the dance in the early stages of this whole relationship, but the DA clearly wants to still be oppositional, in a sense, to the ANC, and equally clearly, a lot of people in the ANC still see it as ultimately the governing party, just having a couple of these rather irritating partners to take care of now as well. I want to move on to another area, and it happens to my question dovetails quite nicely with the question that's been put into the chat box by one of our guests, Bishop Jan de Groef, who says in South Africa there's a big gap between the rich and the poor. A gap that is still growing. Is the coalition government doing something to close that gap? My question to you, Sheila, was about economic policy. Clearly, matters of unemployment, poverty, etc., are right at the top of everyone's list of concerns in this country. There doesn't seem to be any shared policy framework between the various parties in the GNU. We had the big battle around the budget and so on. Can they effectively tackle the major economic issues, or are they still too far apart?
Look, I think they are far apart. But I also agree that the proof that the GNU works is going to be in its successes in awakening our ailing economy, and makes a difference to the lives of the poor, that's for sure. And that, I think, will require a major turnaround, But when we're talking about government, it's not government that's in fact going to save the economy. It's going to be business and manufacturing and so on. But in government, the key will be in the ability of this administration to work across all 3 tiers of government. And people can use that they can use, because there's a national development plan, and also in the policy that flows from the legislative frameworks and the legislative processes that we already have. So there is policy there that they can work with, and at last we see a parliament that is being more robust in that regard, making sure that things are actually being implemented, asking the questions about why things aren't working. But I think at the end of the day, it's at the local level that people's lives are lived, and where we're going to have to see the differences. And that's where we need to see concerted effort at implementing the integrated development plans that come out and that are mandated at local levels, at municipal levels. So it's there where we see the implementation and the provision of services that will bring investment into different sectors of the economy that will generate jobs, I think. So we have to have the fundamentals in place, like a functional rail system, roads, electricity, water, sanitation, as well as other infrastructure that's necessary for business and manufacturing to flourish. And we don't have that. I mean, it's all kind of failed. We're in that respect, we're in very much of a failed state. And there's everything to do in relation to fixing things that are broken. And And in addition, people need basic public goods such as health services and schooling, tertiary training that provide capable citizens. So for me, one of the central points in kind of getting things, turning the economy around, is in fact turning the municipalities around. And I think that's probably the most important thing that this national government should be focusing on, really. Sort out the ailing water, sanitation, infrastructure, fix roads, fix schools, and that will begin to stimulate the economy. It means, of course, that they do have to provide an enabling policy framework, and I think it's there in parts around and about everywhere, but it needs kickstarting in order to encourage foreign direct investment. It means allowing scarce skills in more easily, and I think that is exactly what Schreiber is doing. He's making it much more easy for foreigners to come in, and they're busy. Home Affairs is busy in making visas easier. And then we have to ensure that the CETAs work, and Parliament is directly dealing with the CETA problem now. Let's hope that Ramaphosa has heard the extent to which people are unhappy with the present minister and get rid of her. She needs to go. And I think Parliament is pushing on that one too. So in my view, at this point, Ramaphosa has absolutely nothing to lose. He's going in 4 years, if not before, in any case. So right now, he needs to focus his mind and get rid of incompetent ministers in his own party instead of necessarily focusing on this. Perhaps he's just starting with this DA deputy minister as a first step, and he needs to get rid of all these incompetent ministers. We've all seen how cronyism has hollowed out the state at every single level. The Zondo Commission has given him the evidence to act, and it's been a great disappointment that before now he hasn't set the criminal justice system in motion so that we can see accountability at last. And we haven't seen the reform that he promised of the ANC. And I think the ANC has paid dearly for it. They've been forced into this GNU, and to actually, they have got a duty to make it work, it seems to me. And then we may be able to see all these other issues fix themselves. But I think that I put in a lot of issues in that response. But I think that is really what needs to be done.
You've mentioned a few areas in terms of economic policy where there have been changes, and one can think, for example, of the sort of public-private partnerships around Transnet and logistics, harbour management.
Yes.
Sustainable energy is another big one. We've got Operation Vulindlela sitting there in the presidency, trying to cut through red tape, etc. Now, a lot of those things predated the formation of the GNU, but it seems to me they've definitely been given an important boost by the new thinking and the new blood that's come into cabinet, that's really allowed those things to gain more momentum than they might have if we had, if the ANC was remaining the sole party in government. I think that's probably accurate.
I think that's it, and I think that's exactly right, and that's what the good, what's her name? The member from the Good Party who's in Parliament and who's been part of this part. Yes, Patricia de Lille. Sorry, apologies, Patricia de Lille, for your name slipping from my memory. It should never have. But she was saying that this is what is so fascinating about this GNU, is that it's brought all these new voices into the mix that weren't there before, and that has really revivified the whole governance process. I mean, we don't have access to what's being said in cabinet. More's the pity. It would be lovely to be a fly on that wall, but I do think that we have a much more vibrant debating situation here than we had before. You know, people are not simply rubber stamping, and I also think that the cronyism is under attack. So I think we are in a better position than we were in before, politically anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I just remind everybody to, if you do have questions or comments, please do put them into the chat box or the Q&A, and we will try to deal with them. Last question for you. Next year, end of next year, possibly early 2027, we have our next local government elections, and they're going to be very closely fought in many parts of the country, particularly some of the big metros. How is this going to work? How are parties that are now partners in the government of national unity and may still be at the end of next year partners in the GNU going to be able to campaign openly and fiercely and robustly against each other in the local government campaign? That's surely going to throw up some tricky situations.
Yeah, it will. I think we can look forward to a very interesting campaign season in the run-up to the local government elections, where, I mean, as you say, you are joined at the hip in the national government, but you're competing and taking out the knives at local level in the campaign, and that's going to be, I think, indeed very tricky. On the one hand, it's for me as a scholar of multi-level government, you know, it's a good thing, because it's the inevitable consequence of our decentralized system, where we have different governments at different levels, each elected by their own local, provincial, or national electorates, and they don't all need to be the same. That was the whole intention behind the constitutional framework for having local, provincial, and national elections. And maybe, if I start on the positive side, maybe it will mean that the local campaign, or the campaign for the local government elections, will finally be about local issues, about what is plaguing the city of Johannesburg around water, roads, sanitation, and that the campaign for local leadership will not be about, you know, ideology or ethnicity or other kinds of sort of generic sort of things that bind people together, but about what do we want for the city, what do we want for this town, what do we want for this district. It also means, you know, and I think as we saw, reality is we're going to have different coalitions at different levels. You know, when the GNU came out, you know, the initial talk was, well, the GNU is going to be rolled out throughout the country. It's going to be a blueprint for all governments around the country. And that was a very naive notion. Firstly, because you have different electoral outcomes in different parts of the country. I mean, the Western Cape was, you know, it was outright DA majority. So a GNU blueprint was completely unnecessary in that context. And so it was in Limpopo, where there was an outright ANC majority. So it's a bit naive to have that notion of a rollout of a GNU throughout government. And also because we saw, even in those subnational governments, provinces where there was no outright majority, some provinces went another way. Gauteng decided, no, we're not going to have a GNU, we're going to have a minority government. We're not going to include the DA in our government. KZN sort of followed the GNU blueprint by, you know, forging a coalition between the DA and the ANC and a number of other GNU partners, and the IFP, of course. But yeah, the reality is we have different coalitions at different levels of government, and that is okay. That is what almost what the intention is of the Constitution, by saying that each level of government will elect its own government. But of course, the reality on the ground and in politics can be different, because our politics is very centralized. Both the ANC and to a lesser extent the DA, they're very centralized party structures. What happens in a municipality doesn't go unnoticed in Luthuli House or in the DA Federal Council. They keep tabs on these things from the top down. So our politics is centralized. And I'm also worried that still the local government elections the campaign will be it will go into ideology and identity. The MK party will seek to attract voters not so much on local government issues, I'm afraid, but rather on what binds the MK party and its allegiance to its leader. So I really hope that the context that we have now will force parties to campaign on local issues, because I think that's where we want to go, that the voters in the city of Johannesburg will be entertained, as it were, by arguments of candidates about this is what we want to do for this city. This is not about foreign policy or national health or a policy on inflation targeting or on all kinds of national. This is really about crime, free basic services, local development, potholes, water, sanitation, etc. So I think it's going to be important to see how this pans out. Is this good for local democracy? Will it forge a campaign, an election that will finally be about local issues? Or will we go back to the established pattern of identity and ideology politics, and then we're just doing a repeat of the national elections with then another outcome? Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. A reminder quickly to everybody before you leave the meeting, if you would just go to the chat box and download that little response form, evaluation form. Those of you who are regular attendees will know that it takes you about a minute and a half to fill that in, but it's very useful for us and for our sponsors to have your feedback. So please do that for us. Two questions in the chat box that I'd like us to deal with. Firstly, from our most prominent Belgian supporter, Professor Jan Jans, who joins us very faithfully from Belgium for these events. Good evening, Jan. Welcome. Jan is asking, he says the GNU is doing fairly well, given the circumstances, but how is it translating into better practice for South African citizens? This reminds me of the great slogan of the ANC, a better life for all. Is it translating into a better life for our citizens in general terms, do we think? Either of you? Sheila?
I think it's too soon. I think it's too soon for that kind of translation to take place, actually. But having moved from a big metropolitan city to a small village, the politics in a small village is quite robust, actually, and it's very much about local issues and about jobs and about so on, and as in South Africa, all over, patrimonialism asserts itself here too. So there's a lot of resentment in this little village about the fact that the DA councillor has a network of family who occupy some of the places that provide access. It sounds just like the problems that we talk about at national level about the way the ANC operates and a sort of cronyism. So this kind of copinage that exists here, copinage is this crony thing, families, so on, supporting one another and giving them jobs, happens, and those people are benefiting. That is true, but I think that at a general level, we can't yet see the impact in any very significant way in terms of the better life for all. No. But there's no doubt that there has been a very quick turnaround in the Department of Home Affairs, for example. It's become it's become so much more efficient and effective, and it's becoming digitalized. The sort of the corrupt are being ferreted out, and it's happening. We're beginning to see that, and from those kinds of things, we will be able to see in a couple of years' time. We may well see a shift and change.
Yeah. Do you have any particular thoughts on that question?
Well, maybe just one point. I mean, I completely agree that it's too early to tell. I do want to make the point that it certainly is one of the key benefits of coalition politics, coalition governance. Granted, there are many negatives, many disadvantages, the instability issue, etc. But one of the key benefits is that you get compromise politics, you get compromise agreements, compromise outcomes, which generally are more middle of the road. So you take the extreme positions out of policy, because the extreme positions usually don't make it, because you have to compromise. And I think, as Sheila was indicating, that, for example, served Germany very well. And the same goes for other countries on the Northern European continent. Where you see that this kind of compromise-based policies in the end serve the citizens better.
Yeah.
You don't have this flip-flopping from one extreme to the other. So it's promising, but it remains to be seen. Of course, the downside of this is paralysis, where your compromise does not emerge and you just keep kicking the can down the road. You don't take decisions, or you take half-baked decisions that don't serve anyone. So I think it's promising, but too early to tell. I agree with Professor Meintjes.
Right. And then interesting question from Cardinal Wilfred Napier about the national dialogue recently announced, something that was said to be on the agenda of the GNU from the beginning. I think more or less as soon as it was formed, people started to talk about the need for a national coming together, etc., etc. Now, been announced that there will be one. I think 15th of August is the date for the first meeting. How does that fit into the thinking of people who are critical of the government? Do we have any hopes for the national dialogue?
I can give a stab at it. Go for it, Sheila.
I was going to say my short answer is not much. We already know what we need to do, and we should just get on and do it. We know very well what is required, and it seems to me that this is just a distraction. It's just a distraction, and I can't see the benefits. It's going to be expensive. I'd rather put the money somewhere else. Quite honestly, we had big national dialogues in the 90s, and I don't think that the requirements of society have changed significantly since then. We know what to do. Let's get on and just do it.
No.
Yeah, I'm also skeptical. Look, it's always good to keep talking and to keep dialogues going, and all of that is true. But this is a particularly expensive one, and I agree. I'm also skeptical. What I would be much more in favor of is, instead of these big, once-off, high-level national dialogues, because it's not really a national dialogue. It's, of course, it's an elite dialogue. It's a bringing together of the elite, the businessmen and the politicians and the leaders of various sectors of society. They are the elite.
Sports captains, rugby players.
Sports captains, fantastic. Let them talk, all good. But it's not really broadening democracy. What I'll be much more in favor of is that we institutionalize, regularize, the concept of citizen assemblies, particularly at local government level, where the public is regularly invited to make input into big policy decisions. And I'm not talking about publishing an advert and saying comment, but really organizing representative citizen assemblies that can really go into deep conversations, guided by experts, facilitated by government on, okay, what do we do about issues such as climate change? What do we do about issues such as crime or economic justice? And really start teasing out those issues together with your citizens, your residents, on a regular basis, not these big once-off things where it's really just more about the photo opportunity and all the bells and whistles. Then it really is about deepening democracy, for which you need residents, for which you need citizens. The elite will find their way to make their input. They don't need a national dialogue for that.
Good, thank you very much. That brings us very neatly round to 7:30, and that was our cut-off time. So I'm going to bring it to a close there. Let me thank those of you who put questions into the box. It's always very helpful. I don't like to single out guests in these events, but I do on this occasion just want to single out, or to thank in particular, three of our bishops from the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference who joined us this evening. Cardinal Wilfred, I think most people know, Cardinal Wilfred Napier, Bishop Jan de Groef, and Bishop Neil Frank were also in the audience. It's good for us at Cplo to have you with us. You are, after all, our bosses. But thank you for joining us. Sometimes down here in Cape Town, we feel very far away from the Bishops' Conference. To everybody else who joined us, you are equally welcome and equally thanked for taking time out. In particular, our two speakers. I think there were great contributions, a lot to think about there. I want to thank my colleague, Sue Doherty, in particular, for helping to put this together. We thank the Hans Seidel Foundation for their sponsorship, as always. And a reminder, please not leave before you have just downloaded that little evaluation form. And I hope to see you all again soon at one of our future webinars. Stay warm if you're in the Western Cape and the rest of the country when the cold front gets to you. Look after yourselves. God bless everybody. Thank you. Good night.